It's one of the greatest engineering feats in human history. A canal carved through jungles, mountains, and swamps to link two mighty oceans. The Panama Canal didn't just change shipping routes, it changed the global balance of power. But this wasn't easy. The French failed. Thousands died. And it took American ambition and intervention to make it happen. Over a century later, this narrow stretch of water still controls the flow of global trade. And now, there are whispers of a new player eyeing the same region: China. Did Beijing really gain control of the Panama Canal? Is it planning a rival route through Nicaragua? To answer that, we need to go back, through war, revolution, and decades of American dominance, to understand how the Panama Canal was built, who really controls it today, and why its future could ignite a new kind of global rivalry. The idea of building a canal between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean dates back to the 16th century. In 1513, a Spanish explorer discovered a narrow strip of land that separated these two vast oceans. Just a couple of decades later, in 1534, King Charles V of Spain ordered a detailed survey of the region to determine whether it would be feasible to dig a canal that could link the Atlantic and Pacific. But once the survey was completed, the Spanish realized that carving a canal through this terrain would be an extremely complex and challenging task. The narrow Isthmus of Panama, though just 82 kilometers wide, proved deceptively difficult. Over the centuries, many governments and engineers considered the idea, but no serious attempt was made until the late 19th century. In 1881, a French company took on the ambitious challenge of constructing the canal. This was the same company that had successfully completed the Suez Canal in 1869. The project was led by the renowned French diplomat and engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps, whose name had become legendary after the Suez success. But the Panama terrain turned out to be a very different beast. From the beginning, the project was plagued by severe problems, primarily poor planning and flawed engineering. The first major challenge was the geography. The land was not flat like the Suez Zone. Instead, Panama's central strip was elevated above sea level, requiring much deeper excavation to connect both oceans. Secondly, the terrain wasn't made of soft desert sand. It included rocky soil and even mountains, making excavation significantly more difficult. And if that wasn't enough, the French faced a brutal climate, thick jungles, venomous snakes, disease-carrying mosquitoes, and intense tropical storms. By 1884, an estimated 200 workers were dying every month. Over the course of the project, around 20,000 workers lost their lives, mostly due to diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Realizing that the original design wouldn't work, the French tried to pivot. They hired another engineering giant, Gustave Eiffel, the mastermind behind the Eiffel Tower, to redesign the canal with a lock system. But even his expertise couldn't save the sinking project. In 1889, the company went bankrupt after burning through $287 million, a colossal sum for that era. The project collapsed under the weight of mismanagement, corruption, and unrealistic ambitions. Senior company officials were even tried in French courts. In 1894, another French company attempted to pick up where the first one left off, acquiring the remaining assets and restarting the project. But that effort too fell apart, and once again the canal dream was left in limbo. Now, this is where the United States makes its grand entrance. Since the early 19th century, American leaders had been looking for a shortcut to connect the eastern seaboard with the western coast. At the time, U.S. ships traveling from New York to California had to sail all the way around the southern tip of South America, a long and treacherous journey. A canal across Panama would cut this journey by about 8,000 nautical miles. In 1902, the U.S. Congress approved the acquisition of the failed French company. America bought the company's assets for $40 million. But there was a catch. Panama wasn't an independent country. It was part of Colombia. And the Colombian government refused to agree to the terms of a treaty that would allow the U.S. to build the canal. But here's where things took a dramatic turn. At that very moment, a movement for independence was brewing in Panama. The U.S. saw this as an opportunity and began supporting the Panamanian separatists, both diplomatically and militarily. President Theodore Roosevelt authorized direct military support for the rebels. American naval ships surrounded Panama from both the Atlantic and Pacific sides, essentially cutting off any Colombian response. With this powerful backing, Panamanian revolutionaries successfully declared independence from Colombia in 1903. The U.S. immediately recognized the new Republic of Panama and signed a treaty with its fledgling government. Under this agreement, the U.S. received full control and ownership of the Canal Zone. In return, it paid Panama $10 million up front, plus an annual payment of $250,000, which was to begin in 1912. The U.S. also secured rights to control a 5 to 8 kilometer wide strip on either side of the canal. In 1904, the United States officially began construction. Initially, American engineers tried the same approach the French had attempted, digging a sea-level canal straight through the landmass. But they soon realized it was practically impossible. That's when the chief American engineer proposed building a lock-based canal system. One big advantage the Americans had was that the narrow Panamanian Isthmus was filled with rivers and small lakes. They decided to use this water to create a massive artificial lake, elevated above sea level, connecting both oceans. At the Atlantic end and the Pacific end, they built a system of locks, giant chambers that could raise or lower ships by manipulating water levels. Here's how it works. A cargo ship coming from the Atlantic would enter the first lock. Water would be pumped in, lifting the ship to the level of the artificial lake. The ship would then sail across the lake to the Pacific side. At the end, it would enter a second lock system that would lower it back to sea level before entering the Pacific Ocean. This was revolutionary. Unlike the Suez Canal, which is at sea level and doesn't use locks, the Panama Canal relied entirely on this vertical movement system, an engineering marvel for its time. Construction was finally completed in 1914, and the canal was opened to commercial shipping. Though the project was still grueling, American improvements in planning, engineering, and medical science drastically reduced the death toll. In fact, the number of worker deaths was 4 times lower than during the French attempt. The total cost? Around $639 million. Of that, $287 million had already been spent by the French, and the U.S. invested an additional $352 million to complete the project. At the time, this was the most expensive construction project in U.S. history. As global trade increased and ships grew larger, a problem emerged. The original canal was too narrow for many modern vessels. In 2007, Panama launched a massive expansion project worth $5.25 billion. Completed in 2016, this project added wider lanes and deeper locks on both the Atlantic and Pacific sides, allowing even the largest cargo ships to pass through with ease. Today, the canal sees about 14,000 ships transit every year. The biggest users are the United States, China, Japan, and South Korea. The toll for a single large cargo ship? It can be as high as $450,000, depending on the ship's size and cargo weight. Annually, the canal generates around $1.8 billion in toll revenues. And here's a fun fact. The lowest toll ever paid was just 36 cents by an American adventurer who swam the entire length of the canal in 1928. On average, it takes a ship 8 to 10 hours to pass through the canal. Even after its completion, the canal remained under U.S. control for decades. It wasn't until 1999 that the United States officially handed over full ownership and operational control to the government of Panama. When the U.S. handed over the Panama Canal on December 31, 1999, it didn't go to China. It went to the Panama Canal Authority, an autonomous agency of the Panamanian government. Since then, Panama has managed and operated the canal independently. So why does Donald Trump claim that China has the canal? It's because a Hong Kong-based company, Hutchison Ports, operates 2 commercial ports, one at each end of the canal. But these are just shipping terminals, not the canal itself. They don't control the locks or canal operations. Yes, China has invested heavily in Panama and Latin America, but none of this means China controls the canal. Panama has firmly denied any Chinese control. The canal remains under Panama's full authority, and all operations are managed locally. Trump's narrative plays into geopolitical fears about China's global influence. But the truth is simple. The Panama Canal is Panamanian, not Chinese. That's not where the story ends. While China doesn't control the Panama Canal itself, Beijing may be eyeing something even more ambitious, a potential alternative to the canal altogether. Way before the Panama Canal was ever built, another route was under consideration, through Nicaragua. It's longer, yes, but easier to construct because of Lake Nicaragua, a massive freshwater body that could serve as a natural part of the canal route. In 2013, the Nicaraguan government stunned many by awarding a 50-year concession to a Chinese company to build this rival canal. The proposed cost? Around $40 billion. Environmental experts quickly raised the alarm, warning that large cargo ships could pollute the lake and that saltwater could permanently damage this critical freshwater ecosystem. But the bigger issue? Geopolitics. If China moves ahead with this canal, it would be seen as a direct challenge to U.S. influence in the Americas and could ignite serious tensions between Washington and Beijing. So far, the project hasn't gone anywhere. It's stalled, buried under technical, environmental, and financial roadblocks. But if China ever decides to revive it, it won't just be about trade routes. It could mark the start of a new geopolitical power play in America's own neighborhood. The Panama Canal is one of history's greatest engineering feats, born from Spanish ambition, built on French failure, and completed by American resolve. It transformed global trade and gave the U.S. massive strategic power. Today, while Panama runs the canal, new tensions are rising. China's growing interest in Central America and its stalled plan for a rival canal in Nicaragua could reshape the balance of power once again. If that ever happens, this 100-year-old canal could become the center of a 21st-century superpower rivalry. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and comment to let us know. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful stories from history and geopolitics.